think for me, the most important key aspect of this work is to try to be as authentic as you can be. And that sometimes that entails that kind of trying to feel safe. And I think that's where we come from when we think about, let's think of a pre-measured ingredient, or just give me what I need in order to achieve this goal. And I think hopefully today we will be able to unveil that this is really more so about discovery and a journey, and feeling sometimes feeling exposed, feeling vulnerable, and sometimes just feeling uncomfortable as well. And I think that to me is more so the real key, is how do you achieve, and how do you claim progress in this area. So let me first pull the questions here. We have a set of predetermined questions for our panelists. And I'm so thankful and thrilled to moderate this morning's panel, because I think they can really help us in this not so clear but important journey that so many of us are so interested in. So let's begin our first question. The first question goes to Gimbala. We recognize, as I said, that this is the start of the journey, and all of you here with us find yourselves in different stages of this journey. Depending upon where you are, what would you recommend to an employer or an organization who is just beginning that journey or thinking about embarking in this journey of racial equity?
Thank you very much, Julia. First, I want to thank the Chamber for definitely leading this effort, and getting all of its members to be in this moment. It's definitely not easy, but as I often say, we can no longer abdicate our roles within the community as leaders in the business, or just citizens within our community. We can no longer abdicate our responsibility to say something, right, and ensure that we're creating a community, a workplace that everyone feels welcome, and they feel like there is an opportunity for them to contribute and be heard and be respected. So to me, this is a beginning of what I hope to be a beginning of long and difficult conversations that are going to yield incredible results within our community here in Maine and anywhere else, anyone else that's watching today. So for me, when I coming into this conversation, I'm very cognizant about the size of my organization and the role that we play in this community, and the fact that not many of the members within the chambers and many of the folks that are listening today have to that level of resources of where we are as an organization, and so the biggest thing that I hope that everyone could take out of this is it doesn't matter the size of your organization, where you are in this moment, as long as you are interested and open to doing something, that's definitely a good start, right? And in most cases, a lot of the work in D&I doesn't, most of my D&I colleagues would kill me for saying this, doesn't require a lot of resources to start with, right? It's just a matter of mindset and thinking. But ultimately, you need to invest as an organization to close some of the gaps that you have as an organization. To Julia's question, for many organizations, I say this internally and with my colleagues, my peers, and some of the staff at WEX. For us, the journey really begins, when you start to see, or when there is engagement from your culture, from your employee base, and the commitments that the company wants to take on going forward, right? And every culture is different. Every organization is different. But what I will say is, this is a journey that starts with first creating a psychological safety environment. Because with the lack of psychological safety, then these conversations become difficult, right? Conversations around race, around diversity and inclusion becomes difficult. But there's a level of maturity curve that goes through, and to get to that point where you can actually start engaging and have these conversations. But that said, it really comes from the ethos of your organization and what you want to do, what you want to be recognized as, what you want to do that that is right as an organization, that is right for your culture going forward. So I'm not going to take too much time on that, but I'll pass it on back to you.
Amy, anything you'd like to ask? Would you like me to repeat the question?
I think I am all set. Thank you, Julia.
Okay.
I think following up to what Gimbala was saying, you do have to provide that safety for your staff, and you also have to know where they are. So we're all on this continuum of DE&I, and where I might be, because I've had 20 years in HR, is probably vastly different than where many of my staff are. So tapping into where is your staff on this continuum, and then starting with, can you start with an employee survey? Can you start with some low-hanging fruit where you can review where you're posting your jobs, something that is easier to go about, that may not take a lot of time, but may have a pretty big impact that then could potentially lead to going to your management and getting buy-in from leadership. I think that's one of the most important things for any organization, is to have that support. And we often feel like in HR, it's our role to take on as leading these initiatives. And often it takes your entire leadership in your organization. And so if you have that buy-in and you have that leadership, then you can really dig into, where do we go from here on this process? Does it mean an equity audit for your organization? Where does that lead?
Thank you. And Chanel?
Yeah, I think, for folks who are just getting started on this journey, I think it's really important just at the basics to be curious and to really excavate your organizational culture. When I started at IDEXX in July of last year, I spent a lot of my time, really the first 100 days, talking with as many people as possible to understand the culture. And that qualitative data can really provide a lot of insight into how we describe our culture, what do we enjoy about it, what are our areas of opportunity to grow and develop, and from there being able to make connections between the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion and your culture. So to Amy's point, it's not just an HR effort, right? It's not just like another HR activity. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, when infused properly, yields so many results and outcomes for the organization at large. And so being able to look at diversity, equity, and inclusion through the business case lens, and knowing that talent is always a business imperative when we approach diversity and inclusion and equity from a lens of, yes, it's good to do, and we should all be doing it because we honor humanity, we honor people and their experiences and how they come to work, and wanting them to come to work authentically. And when we do so, we have the ability to enable so much more from our organizations. And so I would just say, be curious and ask questions and listen. Be continuous, intentional listeners as you're going through the journey. That way you can understand what will work for your organization. Because it's easy to look around, and you'll hear me say this throughout the entire panel. It's very easy to look around and see what other organizations are doing. I look at what Gimbala is doing. I'm like, geez, I should be doing what Gimbala is doing. We all should be doing what Gimbala is doing. But from there, it can become very overwhelming. So it's really important to kind of filter the information that you're taking in, looking around your colleagues, your counterparts, but also really learning and understanding your own organization and making the connection, aligning it with what's most important.
I know that Chanel says that jokingly, you know, but you shouldn't all be doing what Gimbala and Wex is doing, right? Because innately to your organization and your culture, right, there are some things that are going to work for you. And then there are some things that work for us that's completely different, right? You know, if, you know, I'm not going to take the same strategies that work for Wex and take it to IDEXX or take it to United, right? Because it's all going to be a little bit different.
So all of you touched upon this idea of culture. I think Amy was sharing with us a few steps and concrete examples of things that organizations and businesses can do. But I'm wondering, Chanel, if you can go a little bit further or deeper into how did you go about learning about your organization's own culture? Going beyond the examples that maybe Amy shared, and maybe something that surprised you or something that you had to adapt, or you know, something that you had to pay special attention to because of this culture.
That's a great question. And I think, you know, oftentimes when we are talking about our workplaces or our work environments, because for some of us who are working remotely, our work environments are now our home. So we just have to be mindful of that. And whether we believe it or not, culture isn't confined to the office, like the actual physical space. It is infused and intertwined into everything that we do, from email response time to how frequently we're scheduling meetings, and even nowadays, whether you have your video on or not. Like, these are all parts of the culture. And what I find is that you know, there are tight cultures and loose cultures, and I'm getting into sociology, so I won't bore everyone. But, you know, having an understanding of what are the concrete elements of our culture requires a ton of listening. It sounds really simple, but it takes a lot of time, because when again, when I started at IDEXX, I had an intention to listen to as many colleagues as I could. And from there, it was, you know, colleagues at all management levels, all sorts of backgrounds. IDEXX is a global enterprise. And so talking with colleagues that weren't in my time zone, who didn't work in our Westbrook headquarters. And what it enabled, it gave me an understanding of, you know, do we have concrete areas that resonate for folks within our culture, regardless of where you are? And also, you know, are there more specific localized elements of our culture? I asked everyone the same sets of questions, which I think is really important just from a data collection and analysis perspective, because at the end of, I would say, my first 100 days, I had about 80 one-on-ones and a couple of small group conversations, which sounds, is as much as it sounds. But then from there, I was able to review my notes, do some analysis, and see, like, what are the areas that are popping up for our organization. So for example, IDEXX is a very innovative organization. And what became very clear is that what resonated for a lot of us at IDEXX is that when you have a strategic focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, it actually drives and enables innovation. We're able to be more innovative. And so being able to make that link to knowing that innovation is really, really important to my organization, to my company. How can I align diversity and inclusion to that cultural pillar? So a lot of listening. We have employee engagement surveys. So being able to review those, and again, it's a lot of research and development and analysis of the data that you have access to. And that has enabled me to just be a little bit more specific in my approach and understand, like, what are the cultural pinnings, what are the pieces that, what makes our culture sticky, and align the diversity and inclusion efforts and strategy to that.
Thank you. I think that's such an important point that I think a lot of organizations just do not pay enough attention to in the diversity and inclusion perspective. Anything that you like to add, Amy, that you did not add?
I think from my experience, United Way has a really robust core values system. So coming in, for me, it wasn't a question of who this group of people are. It was more the individual person. So back to what Chanel was saying, a lot of listening, and really just being part of a lot of different groups. We call them cross-functional teams, and really getting perspective for other departments, other roles, to really get immersed in the culture of United Way. And one of the interesting things that happened just before I arrived here, so United Way, for those of you who don't know, we are mostly outward facing. So we are a service organization. We raise funds and put those funds back into the community. And so our organization is just as much our volunteers and those doing work with us. And so United Way did listening sessions with community members to develop what we now have as a diversity action plan. And it may sound super remedial, like what are you writing down? What is it that you're hoping to do? But we've found that having a specific plan in place with number targets and things that we are really focusing on internally in our organization has really given us really clear direction on where we want to go, what we want to do with our goals, and then enlightens our training, which luckily enough we had Chanel actually join us to kick off our diversity, equity and inclusion work with our teams. So I think really listening, really engaging, really getting to know your organization from the inside out, and then doing what's best for you all. And we can offer specific examples, like surveying staff and really listening, and each organization is going to be different.
Gimbala?
I was trying to find my mute button. Yeah, so definitely I'm trying to get a baseline understanding of where your culture is. It's one thing that I will say is a constant approach that you want to have this, in this journey across all levels and across different organizations. For us, it's a little bit different, and for me, it was a little bit different than, for Chanel or Amy, in the sense that, so through the employee engagement surveys that we had and, some of the programs and initiatives that we had, before this whole, natural conversation, these whole conversations began, we were already starting to see some of this impact and some of the ask coming from our employees through years of collecting data and all of that. So it allows us to be able to kind of see some of the gaps that exist and then slowly start to chip away and close some of these gaps as we go. For me, the base of my strategy, and I think, so I use this, through pretty much everything that I do. So there's this great book by Richard Thaler, who's a behavioral economics, called Nudge. And he goes by and talks about the different ways of, in a behavioral economics way of nudging people to do the right things. It's setting the ecosystem, right, for people to actually make the right decisions. And one could argue is good for them or not, but making the right decisions as they go. So that is essentially how I've used that concept, throughout my professional career in setting up, and looking at and assessing the gaps that exist in the work that needed to be done, and then creating an ecosystem where a lot of that could flourish, right? So you nudge people to do the right things rather than force them, to get there. And many people have different strategies and different ways of doing this, but it's just, for us, it worked that way, right? And and in some organizations it may work and some it doesn't. But you definitely want to start by understanding, having a baseline understanding of where you are as a company.
Thanks. I'm sorry, the sirens are just crazy out here. Something that you mentioned earlier and that you touch upon a little bit now is I think we all get, those of us who are connecting employers to talent and are more in the systems-based kind of work. It is often that organizations or employers of smaller size wonder how can they go about this when they don't have the resources, they don't have the human capital, the staff, the experts. And sometimes that becomes the first barrier, whether that is a mental barrier from the get-go or it's a true barrier. So I didn't know if that's something you touched upon at the beginning, Gimbala. I didn't know if you could speak to it, and then I'll ask Chanel and Amy to also join.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, and I'd say this because, you know, in DEI work needs investment, right? But, you know, to start to get to the point where you need the investment and resources, is really more of a mindset shift, right? You know, for those of you who don't know, I mean, we spent a whole long time, you know, before this session just talking about that, right? It's a mindset shift. It's a mindset shift from, you know, the leaders of HR. It's a mindset shift of, you know, leaders in the organization in terms of, you know, what they want to do, and make space for that, you know, in their brains, to be able to sit back and analyze their current processes and their current culture, and understand the gaps that exist, and come up with strategies around that. Yeah, so without that piece, right, you know, to get to the resource, right? So that's part of that baseline understanding, right? You need to sit back and analyze, okay, so what am I doing today that works and what doesn't work? You know, what am I doing today that allows me to be able to, you know, recruit, you know, highly diverse talent, or not, right? What am I doing today that is creating, you know, or, you know, creating a culture that is, you know, engaging, fostering inclusivity, and all these different things, right? So all of these things, all those questions, it's a mindset shift there, you know. And once you start to ask those questions and you start to analyze and start to see the gaps that exist, then you can create a roadmap and a strategy to get to where you need to be, and the aspirations and commitments that you need to get there. And once those things are down on paper, that's where the investment and resources comes in play. It took me, about a year and a half, and, you know, so been at WEX now for 4 years, you know, been doing this work, you know, on a non-official basis, you know, for about 2-3 years, 3.5 years really. And then when we got to an official state where we want to say, okay, we want to, you know, officially begin our D&I journey, you know, I had to kind of look back in about a year and a half and understand, right? So the journey really began a year and a half ago, rather than when we said, you know, we wanted to start. So, the journey began a year and a half before when we officially kind of jump into that journey. So those are the kind of things, right? It takes a mindset. It takes your shift in your mindset, and then it takes a time for you to be able to get there as an organization. And those things don't require instant resources to start with, unless you're really, really small company or organization staff. When you only have one person in charge of HR, Amy, then you want to go bring in, right? You know, but that's a little different.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Gimbala, like there are different ways to assess your organization. You talked about mindset. I also like to look at the very simple, seemingly low effort but high impact activities or initiatives that organizations can take to promote not only diversity but a more inclusive culture. You know, for example, whether you're hiring for one person or many, a mindset shift is hiring for culture add versus culture fit. And this is one that I think is really important. You know, we often have requisitions and you have openings and you want to find someone who can do the job, but oftentimes it's you know, cloaked with a little bit of bias because, for example, let's say I'm Gimbala, I'm looking for another Gimbala. Gimbala was great, really liked working with Gimbala. Let's just hire another Gimbala. That is hiring for fit. And what that does, it kind of creates a very kind of myopic way of looking at talent. And so instead, and you can find more information on this in the diversity bonus book, which is, we probably should come up with a list of books because Gimbala mentioned Nudge. And I remember Gimbala recommending Nudge to me when I started my diversity and inclusion journey in the professional sense, and the diversity bonus by Scott Page. But the idea about tools, right? And we all, based on our experiences, our backgrounds, our education, and our perspectives, have a set of tools. And if we're just looking for folks who can just bring in the same sets of tools as everyone else on the team, we're not going to have a net increase of skills and tools that help us solve new, more challenging, more innovative problems. And so when we hire for culture ad, for example, we have to be more mindful of, what are the areas that we are lacking? Where could we be a better team or a better organization if we had, a different perspective at the table helping us make decisions? And so a very simple question to ask yourselves as you're hiring, whether it be one person for the year or for, until the next person leaves, or many, is, are we hiring for culture fit, or are we hiring for culture ad? Are we inviting someone to come into our organization and bring their full self, bring a new set of ideas? And at the same time, do we have a culture that supports that? Going back to how Gimbala started us off talking about psychological safety as a key component of inclusion. Do we have a psychologically safe environment where if I do have a different opinion, when I speak up, will it be listened to? Will it be considered? Or is it just like, oh, here goes Chanel again. Really shouldn't have hired her. Not a good fit. And so I think just asking ourselves some of those simple questions. And I think for smaller organizations that would like to improve kind of their recruitment and retention, I think it's really important to leverage the connections within our communities. So we have a perception that Maine in general is not very diverse. I like to challenge that a bit because I think, we just have to be a little bit more innovative and thoughtful and creative with how we are creating solutions to our hiring challenges. So, again, culture ad versus culture fit, must-haves versus nice-to-haves on your job descriptions. We have a lot of students, we have a lot of folks from the new Mainer population, and we can ask ourselves, are we creating job descriptions that specifically say what we need? And because everyone's going to go through some training and through some sort of onboarding. So we can expand our thinking and expand our mindset around, what makes someone a qualified talent. Because I'll say this, I think it's important that whenever we are talking about diverse hiring practices, that it's not just to find your token hire. No one wants to be a token hire. And organizations don't want to just hire for representation, right? We want to hire because I want people to be able to bring their full selves to work and contribute in a meaningful way and be engaged and be productive and stay. And so when you have an inclusive organizational culture and practices and policies, you're more likely to see higher engagement, higher retention, and higher productivity levels from your employees.
Thanks, Chanel. Talent is a business imperative. I'm going to use that quote from now on, with your permission. Amy, anything you'd like to add to the wise voices?
So wise. I am so lucky to be in this company. So I want to piggyback on what you were saying, Chanel, about really looking at what you have internally. A great place to really dive deep is your job description, like Chanel was saying, and really look at what is required and do you actually know what's required of your jobs. It's a great time to really do an inventory of, You know, is this job still necessary? Are all of the pieces still being done? Is this a requirement, truly a requirement, or is this a nice have? I was talking with a colleague recently, and one of the anecdotes that I was told was about this IT role. And, you know, as professionals in one industry, you really get to know certifications and when new things are developed. And so this IT professional was looking at a posted job description, and the requirement was 5 years of experience with this certain program. And the program had only been developed 2 years ago. So a complete impossibility to have the required experience that was posted. And so literally every candidate would be disqualified because they didn't even have their facts correct as far as that learning program. So are you undermining your own process? So be mindful of that. And I am lucky enough to work for an organization that has built diversity, equity, and inclusion into our strategic plan. So once you get to a point where diversity has become a daily consistent conversation, it's building it into your identity as an organization, and then working through that with, we have now started working on putting it on job descriptions and putting diversity work into our performance appraisals. And so it's really becoming an ingrained part of our identity. And I know we're further on the spectrum than a lot of organizations, but I'll remind you, I have 34 staff. So it's a very small organization. And, you know, I work with a very tiny little budget. And so you can do a lot of what we spoke about, surveying staff, listening, really having those connection conversations. And don't forget about ourselves. I know a lot of folks on this call are human resources folks. Don't forget to rely on each other. I do it often where I'm calling a colleague saying, hey, I haven't run into this yet. Have you? Have you put into place a diversity action plan? Maybe we can swap. So there are other resources other than just, you know, large advertising groups and things of that nature. Rely on each other. And don't forget that you have some pretty awesome colleagues out here that may be in different places than you and can shed some light on maybe where you are at the beginning, where they have already gone through some of that and say, oh, hey, yeah, I've already been through that. This is the lesson that I learned. And here's some advice for your journey. So don't forget your surrounding others.
Thank you, Amy, for those tips. I think something that I wanted to also, I mean, I think all of us in this panel are tend to not isolate, and we try to integrate as much as we can. And I think something that maybe we don't speak a lot about is, you know, that one thing is diversity, inclusion, belonging. So, and all that intertwines with culture, all that intertwines with the, I like to say, quote unquote, false notion that, you know, it is hard to recruit diverse talent in Maine. So all of that is just part of this ball, and how do we unpeel all those layers? Because I think I like to hear from your perspective that sometimes it's easy or easier to recruit diverse talent than retain diverse talent, and how those two things play in this whole idea of culture as well. So Chanel, you think
I do, because I think, you know, it's one thing to say that we want diversity, and then it's another to know if your organization is an inclusive one. So I think I often say this, that we all have a myriad of experiences, many dimensions of diversity that we all bring to work. And it is, I think nowadays, especially, a little bit more unrealistic to expect that people will not bring their full selves to work. Just think about it. We're having conversations now in the workplace that we probably wouldn't have last year, 5 years, 10 years ago. And that's because it's, the data and the research shows that when people are able to not necessarily put on a completely new identity just to come to work every day, they're more likely to stay. And so if I'm coming into an organization, I'm a woman identifying, and if I come into an organization and I feel as if there isn't an intention behind making not only me but everyone feel like there is equitable access to opportunities to grow and develop, to contribute, I'm going to feel like maybe this isn't the place for me. And so, as we think about hiring for diversity, some organizations call their offices inclusion and diversity, or diversity, inclusion, belonging. There's so many iterations, but the whole point is, if you don't have an inclusive culture, an inclusive organization, inclusive processes that are constantly mitigating our human brain and the ability for us to just quickly make decisions based on stereotypes and bias, if you don't have processes in place to mitigate bias and also bolster a sense of inclusion, it will be a revolving door of talent, not just diverse talent, by the way. And when I say diverse talent, I guess it's the non-majority. We can get it. Everyone's diverse. So I would just be very specific with what we're saying as well. Is it diversity? Is it a particular dimension of diversity that we're looking for? So it's okay to be specific, mindful not to tokenize, but also asking ourselves, do we have inclusive processes as an organization so that when people are coming in from very different backgrounds and experiences, that they feel that they're able to contribute just like anyone else? There's organizations, and Maine knows this, we have a lot of long tenured employees within organizations, folks that have been in those roles for a long time. And sometimes that creates a sense of bias about, what is and what isn't, and what's able to change and what's not. And so asking ourselves to kind of expand our thinking, it really all goes back to mindset. I think we keep circling around the same themes of culture and mindset, because it's one thing to say we want diverse talent. It's another thing to also make sure that the talent that you're bringing in, regardless of the dimensions of diversity that they represent, have a feeling that they can be there fully, that they don't have to put armor on to come to work, that they can come to work fully authentically as themselves. And I would also add our institutions of higher learning and just institutions of learning in general in this area have a wealth of talent. And, this is just a plug for being very intentional about making connections within our institutions of learning, because you have talent there, and it takes effort to create relationships that build out your pipelines of talent. So that's kind of my soapbox.
Amy or Gimbala, anything you'd like to add in this discussion of diversity versus inclusion, and not forget that piece that I think often is forgotten, that we get so in the mindset of bringing in this talent that then we forget about the existing structure, culture that is not going to allow for this your team to succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if I'm sure Amy can chime in as well. Yeah, so that you have to have an environment where any sort of diverse talent, and however you define diverse, can come in and feel like they can be successful, are supported, they have a voice, and they're listened to, they're heard, and they can share ideas. Right? It goes back to psychological safety, which I think psychological safety is one of those things that we as it's one of those things that I think in HR we haven't even talked about enough. I mean, it's in the fringes of some of these research that you see, and people will say safe space, right? But it's not necessarily talked about enough. But I could tell you right now, there is no DEI work, or there's no diversity and inclusion if there's no psychological safety. And that can be a whole nother panel conversation. But you definitely want to create a structure and environment for any sort of diverse talent to be able to come in and be successful. You know, we lean into the concept around employee resource groups. And part of it is because they serve as that touch point of many different cultures and affinities that we have across the company. And I think, you know, I'm pretty sure IDEXX has something similar, but not necessarily the same, but something similar. Many organizations out there have the same thing. And the idea there is, you know, I'll be very transparent, right? You know, coming to Maine, I have to think about, you know, where are there other people that look like me, right? And how do I, you know, as you can tell, my hair keeps getting longer, right? And that's because I still haven't found a good barbershop yet, right? You know, so I cut my hair on my own. But those things are very important to me. Yeah, and as you start to go and recruit, those things are key to be able to, for the talent that you're seeking, to be able to see and look into your organization and say, oh, okay, there is a community here for me to be able to interact and engage with and learn about how I can grow within the organization and within the industry in general. One of the things that we do is for certain roles, we embed our employee resource groups in the hiring flow of those roles, right? So, you know, if you are coming in, you know, case study, right? You know, you have a director that's coming in plucked out of New York or anything like that, you know, looking to come into the organization, and somewhere right before the interview process, right before they start the interview process, we start to talk to them about the culture, and my recruiters will heard me call it, you know, the WEX success book, right? Where we give them, you know, information about the culture and the organization and all of these different things. And immediately they can get connected to, you know, leaders of the ERGs, and they can start to build relationships with them before they even get to that interview or offer stage or anything like that. This is someone that is completely arbitrary from that entire process. That will give them an objective view of what the culture is, right? And they start to build that relationship. And when they get through to the offer stages, you know, they have someone that they can always confide into, you know, and this person is just an ambassador, right? They're just there, you know, to give them a honest view, no sort of stake in that hiring process. And then if they get hired, that is someone that they already know. They've already built a natural mentor or buddy, you know, before they even get into the organization, right? And that's part of that process. So we did this really well in our early career programs, and, you know, it proved very successful. And, you know, those are the things that we start to kind of pluck into kind of the permanent recruiting and all of that. And that's how you use, you know, the structure that you have in place, the culture that you have in place, the people that you have in place within your organization in the recruiting process to be able to kind of hook and sync that talent that you need to be able to come in.
It's a great tip. Thanks so much for that. I hope everyone learn and adapt it to their own organizations the Gimbala way. Amy?
We actually have a similar program, not during the recruiting process, but we do have buddies once you come on staff. So I'm seeing a couple themes going on here. One of the things that I would say, and not to be the negative Nelly, but when people leave, I've talked to several colleagues who don't do exit interviews. And my, oh my, what a wealth of information you can get from someone who is leaving. It's a free resource. And you may wonder, why do I want to know about someone's experience if they're leaving my organization? Well, you can find out about what led them to that. And, you know, did they find their dream job that was too good to pass up? Okay, great. But are they leaving because of something that is going on or has been sort of festering in your organization that maybe you didn't know about? So really pay attention to what people are saying when they leave, maybe someone has come in to talk to your HR person where something's not comfortable for them. Really listen to those conversations and really use that information to direct what you are working on in your organization. There's a lot that you can do in your organization that doesn't cost money, that doesn't require an outside party coming in, that will lead you to really being able to start building your DE&I process. So I would say exit interviews, and then really just, as we've said before, listening to your staff, listening to your managers, listening to the folks who leave your organization, and listen to the folks who are coming into your organization. So when you have interviews, listen to what the people are saying. One of the most fascinating things that happens to me in interviews is really getting to know the person, but also maybe are we lacking something? One of the interviews that we held last year, one of the candidates was diverse, and I mean, you can take a peek at our organization on our website, and she looked at me and said, "Are you ready for me?" And so as HR people, we have to be able to answer some of those challenging questions. And I was honest with her. I said, "I really hope we are. We've been doing the work, and hopefully you'll be able to let us know if we are still not meeting the mark. And your staff will find out when they come in. So it's better to be honest about where you are in your process. If you haven't started, we're looking at where we start. Be honest, listen to your staff and your folks coming in the door, and really use that information to your advantage."
So we've received several questions on the chat so far, and one that seems to continue to come up is ideas for this employment engagement survey that all of you have spoken to a degree, to get to know your culture and just your existing employees, etc. See if you have any suggestions for sample questions or some surveys that you could share with the audience that have proven helpful and some others that have not.
I would say that, for us, we work through a vendor, and a lot of you have a lot of different employee engagement firms out there that could help. And I think depending on the number of the size of your organization, might, I don't know what that looks like from a resource or cost perspective, but it is helpful to have organizations that do this work, who can inform kind of your overall survey questions. It's helpful for us, I think. And Amy, I see that you're nodding.
We use an outside firm as well. We don't do it every year. We do it every other year. And the name of the organization we use is Energage. Energage, I just typed that into the chat. And Chanel's right, there's a lot of different vendors out there depending on what your needs are. Our vendor has a very set, specific number of questions. I believe there are 12. And so we do it every other year. We are a small organization, and we build it into our budget. And then we use those results to inform what the leadership team is going to be working on based on those results. Do we have some ground to make up in communication? Right now it's meetings, shocking. So we really listen to what the staff are saying are inhibiting themselves from performing to their best ability. And if there are any challenges that they hear, they come up in that survey.
And it's so we've used vendors. We've gotten to a point where we're creating our own surveys. So it's a mixed bag of depending on the size of the organization. The other thing that what I will say too, I mean, I know sometimes vendors can get expensive, but if you are the size of an organization and you don't have the resources, hire. There's plenty of IO psychologists, students, graduate PhD level students that do this type of work every day. I'm sure they're more than happy to come in, and do a co-op for you and develop the strategy around and just kind of you know, you have to figure out the platform and how you want to measure it. But then there's Qualtrics, you can use that, and you can use many other platforms there. But yeah, definitely working with specific, you know, higher education institutions where they do some of these work anyways, especially the ones with higher HR type programs. You can get this work done for you, you know, cheap. You know, I would say $5,000-$10,000 cheap. You know, and you may not necessarily, you know, be a vendor per se, but you can save a lot of money there if you're just starting to.
Trying to unmute. I think the other thing that I'm not in an HR role, but something that I'd like to emphasize is something that Chanel shared with us, that I think to avoid putting people in very specific myopic buckets, that to allow in those employee engagement tools for that employee to express their full selves and all the identities they bring to the organization or the employer. So like going back to Gimbala's point and the ambassadors, you know, I may be Hispanic, but Hispanic woman, it's not often that they love soccer, and I just love soccer. And so if there's a group that I can connect with my buddies, that I may have more things in common with them than what it is to eat ethnic food, Hispanic, Latin food of some kind. So just to really unveil all of that, I think really can strengthen your retention efforts as well.
Can I?
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
so there are one or two questions here on the chat that I'm seeing that I want to be able to address if you allow me. And the question around, do you have any specific suggestions for recruiting more diverse nonprofit board members in rural areas? I mean, we're in a pandemic. Everybody's working remote. If there's never a better time for you to be able to recruit diverse members to be able to join your board remotely, I mean, there's no better opportunity for you to be able to do that, right? So ask yourself, do you really need board members to actually be on site? You know, and if you, depending on your answer there, then that would allow you to be able to kind of figure out, okay, so what is that next step going to look like? Because I can tell you, you know, there are many, many, many potential board members that you can, you know, attract into your board if you, you know, make that seat or make them members virtually. You know, and I get it. Sometimes you want them to be at events and stuff like that. But in a post-pandemic world, that may not necessarily be the case. And then, you know, the idea of how do you better engage with candidates that are not trained or credentials in Maine, you know, from a talent acquisition standpoint, I fully understand, right? There's some specific roles that need specific credentialing and certification, right? You know, legal, some risk roles, some roles in the healthcare and whatnot. But generally, there are transferable skills that you can look across many non-Mainers, non-US candidates that will apply to the roles that you're looking for, right? My team knows this, you know, there's an adjacent matrix that you can create that you see based on the skills that you're looking for to fill a role and what the adjacent skill sets are that could potentially be transferable into these roles. So I think as HR professionals, and especially the ones that interact in the talent acquisition world, we need to be able to think beyond and expand the scope of what, you know, it's on the position description, and ask ourselves, right, do we really need these positions or these skills, you know, or is there transferable skills that we can actually take someone, bring them in, and provide them with a little bit of training to get there? If you think you're going to go into the marketplace and find a candidate that fits 100% of the skills that you're looking for, I mean, show me your magic potion, because I want some, right? More, you know, 9 times out of the 10, you're going to get someone that has 80, 70% of what you're looking for. And then you as a company, as an organization, can fill the rest, and the manager, right, can fill the rest. So then the question becomes, how well are your managers in training individuals into your organization?
And I think, Gimbala, to that point, you know, you also build out retention when you develop and engage your talent, right? So if you demonstrate a commitment to your talent, they're more likely to stay, and especially if the opportunities are equitable and accessible for everyone, your talent will stay. And so I think it's just a matter of, you know, how can we, again, it goes back to culture fit versus culture add, must haves versus nice to haves. And that helps not only talent that's coming from the foreign trained professionals, for example, it also helps students that are coming right out of school. You know, to Amy's point, you're asking for 5 years of experience on a software that's only been around for 2. You know, maybe not the most ideal, but and folks are more, especially there's a stat out there, and I always get it incorrect, so I apologize. You might have to web search it later, but you know, women are more likely to, and by women I mean like the broad brushstroke, not necessarily intersectionality, but women are more likely to want 8 out of 10, it's something like that, like 8 out of 10 of the qualifications to even apply, whereas men, broad brushstroke, are like 5 out of 10 of the qualifications to apply. And so, you know, when you think about writing out your job descriptions, it's so important to really hone in on, you know, what do we need someone to do? Like, what do we absolutely need someone to come in with? And I think it's even a risk, and might even be attractive to say, here's what we're willing to train, you know, beyond saying it's a nice to have, but here's what we are willing to train you on. Because I think that speaks to an organization's culture as well. So small little changes that emphasize and exemplify that, hey, we want to bring in talent. We are committed to developing our talent, and really want to create a culture that's inclusive.
And you know, and I'm glad you brought that up, and especially, you know, the years of experience that we put on job descriptions, right? You know, it's always, you know, I was at a conference and met a leader, and our conversations were talking about, you know, parity and pay equity within the organization. It's like, yeah, you know, I have, you know, leaders, male, female, you know, 50-50 in my organization. It's like, well, how much do you, I mean, are they all being paid equally? It's like, well, no, you know, the men are paid more, you know, but the women have less years of work experience. So they, you know, that's where the difference is. And I sit there and I think, and you know, my initial response would be, well, okay, you shouldn't be using, you know, years of experience as a compensation philosophy, right? If you put on your job descriptions, you need 15 years of work experience, you should know, or if you don't know now, you know now, just by doing that, you are already blocking some women and getting into the organization. And why is that, right? Because women went into the workforce later than men, right? They went into the workforce in the 1940s after the war, right? Women tend to have 2 or 3 years of absence in their career to go, and just naturally being in a patriarchal society that we're in, to stay home and take care of kids and family members, right? So just by you saying you are paying women less or paying someone less because of the less years of work experience, you are just marginalizing that, you know, that entire group of demographics, right? Because they will naturally have the less years of work experience. You know, and I don't know about you, but today, in this world today, there is nothing that this workforce or the generations of the upcoming workforce cannot learn. And I will actually bet that they will learn faster than most of us, right? So why are you putting stake on the years of experience? Why are you putting on your stake on that? Now I get it. In some roles, it makes sense. Yeah, if I'm gonna have someone that is gonna manage people, I wanna make sure that they have the years of experience to provide the guidance and management. But in most cases, individual contributor roles, you know, you should be looking for learners. That is more important than anything else. You want learners because they are more apt to learn the new tools and skills and whatever you need them to learn to move your organization forward as your organization continues to change and be competitive in this crazy business environment that we're in. So why are you still having, those years of experience is just completely restricting you as an organization to be able to attract the talent that you need to get you to the next place.
Talk about lack of talent acquisition, not being able to really optimize the talent that is out there. Amy, anything you would like to add before I move us on to
I would just add, sort of as Gimbala and Chanel were saying, when you're looking for that talent, my engineers will like this, try to reverse engineer your role. If it needs a specific certification that can only be obtained here in the US and you're looking for external US candidates, bring that role back to a place where that person can meet the requirements, have the skill set to do it, and then career path them to where you would need them to be. I've seen a lot of folks, as you all were saying, build that relationship and build that focus for that new staff member where maybe they start a little lower than they expected, but you have this path built for them where in 3 years' time they see themselves as that certified professional that you need. And it also gives them the career path that they needed to now be able to maintain that work status. So you may not get all of the things you want all at once, and that's okay. It's okay to build your staff from the ground up. So get your basic skills and then create that path, and you'll see a lot of loyalty from that. And the last thing I'll leave you with is happy employees refer other people. So you already have a resource in-house. If you have really grateful, happy staff who love the work they do, they will bring in other grateful, happy staff that will love the work that they do. So tap your current staff. I send our open positions to our board of directors and our staff, hoping that they'll tap into their own networks. So use what you got. It doesn't always have to cost money.
I think the other piece that I would add about foreign trained professionals is that the two things. That one, I think in Maine in general, we're still at a place where we lack the strong lived experiences with these professionals within an employer setting. So we're constantly creating partially false barriers, whether we're talking about English proficiency, that could be a barrier. I always say there's only so much English that you can acquire in the classroom. So if you are in a professional, you are much more likely to gain English proficiency in a much rapid way if you're higher in your field than if you are back in the classroom. And the other is what you've all been saying, like really look at your own applications, your own requirements. A lot of times things are so dusty that maybe there's no certification really required, or there's no way of putting a foreign or a non-US college university in the application, which has happened to many of us personally. And in some ways we've had to lie and just put a college university to just get us through. Those are all things that I think are important when you're thinking about foreign trained professionals, and not to put the Portland Regional Chamber staff now in a position to share, but there's a program that both the Portland Regional Chamber and my office sponsor and run called Portland Professional Connections, that you really can get to know foreign trained professionals in a very friendly way and really get to know what their real challenges are, because I think that's the other piece, that it really requires a lot of guidance from the beginning, and maybe they have gained certifications and other credentials that are really not all that relevant for you as employers, and it's a huge insight for them to have that opportunity to have a coffee or a social and just get your guidance that way. We have many questions coming through right now. One of them, which I thought came from the beginning, and I'll read it to you. What are your thoughts in terms of the leadership capacity for advancing successful, sustainable DEI culture change, it seems that there's, again, that push right now from a lot of the leadership to get the HR teams and other teams within organizations to do this. But how do you engage with leadership so they understand and embrace that it's a whole organizational change and it is not a task of the diversity and inclusion team or the HR team? Any thoughts on that?
Well, can I jump into that? So if we're COVID has made a mess of many different things, right? I am as exhausted as my fellow panelists, and my leaders are exhausted. My employees are exhausted. So I think having capacity where we are today in this COVID environment is very challenging. And if anything, requires a lot more flexibility than anything else. Because honestly, people are just trying to make it to Friday. That's what it is. You make it to Friday, and I don't know about you guys, but I've noticed after 2 o'clock or maybe 1 o'clock, I stop getting emails. Weird thing, right? So having capacity is very difficult to start, at this time. But I'll say in general, leadership and leaders within the organization have or should have a stake in the game, right? Should have a stake in the conversation and should be held accountable and should make the capacity for their teams and their organizations to achieve whatever accountability measures that you have within the DEI strategy. It's not just an HR program, right? It's not a program. It's a practice that is embedded in every single life cycle action that you have as an organization, right? So it's not something that you can peel away, right? DEI work goes through talent acquisition, goes through talent management, goes through compensation, all these different things. So it shouldn't be let me make room or let me create a capacity for it. It should be second nature. When you're thinking about a reorg, you should be thinking about, okay, what is that structure going to look like and the implications that it will have from a diversity standpoint, right? When you're thinking about changing and leveling roles or anything like that, what are the DEI implications there, right? So it's not a binary thing of, well, let me put this away and make capacity for this. No, it goes hand in hand. It is part of the life cycle of who we are as HR professionals. It should be part of the life cycle of how you do business every day. It's business as usual.
I would say that, there are two ways to look at it. There's kind of behavioral inclusion and diversity work, and then there's structural. And the behavior is the individual, right? So I think that they're in tandem with reviewing our processes, our procedures, policies, all of the elements that enable organizations to operate also have to do some behavior work. And I think that is the individual. And that comes from learning and education and awareness. And so, for example, I through my office ordered, copies of the diversity bonus book and distributed them to my executive team and said, hey, here's this book. I think this is a great book for us to read as we, continue on our diversity and inclusion journey. I would love to schedule time with you to talk about it. And I think it's for organizations that are that might have smaller headcount. I think that's a doable way to kind of get the behavior and the mindset work happening, is to find a resource, find a report, read a book, carve out time to build out your growth mindset and your inclusive leadership competency, because it is infused in everything that you do. I always say that the work of diversity and inclusion professionals is planned obsolescence, but knowing that we live in societies that are built with inequity, equity, well, you know, I'm happy I'll be employed for some time. But, you know, I think that the goal is that it becomes so a part of an organization's functioning. It's how we conduct business. It's not something that you can just stick on and peel away, as Gimbala said. So while addressing the structural component of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's also important to provoke the behavior piece. You know, I'd say that a lot of diversity and inclusion work is tackling both, doing a lot of changing hearts and minds, and also changing processes and procedures. It goes hand in hand.
There's another question that I'd like you to try to be brief, because it's a very complex and broad question, and in some ways it's a tricky question to answer, but I'm fully confident that we have the right people here to get into some dialogue. So the question reads, I think a lot of EDI techniques and strategies tend to center the comfort of white individuals and folks. Do you have any suggestions for avoiding or navigating this? I've seen so many initiatives continue to rely on the emotional labor of BIPOC staff. Any suggestions for this participant?
Gimbala. I think, you know, I think that, again, it kind of connects back to how when I talked about diverse, for example, when we say diverse talent, what do we actually mean? I think we have to be very clear about the work that we're doing and who we're doing it for. And my philosophy, I'll speak to mine, and this is mine alone, is that everyone, regardless of what dimension of diversity you represent or the intersections of diversity that you represent, everyone deserves to come to a place where, you know, we all have to work. I don't think it has to be horrible, and we can come to work and be authentic. And so there's a fine line to draw between, you know, sharing your experiences, being curious. I think honoring your colleagues as much as you can, and creating that psychological safety where I can say, hey, you know, I've talked about this a lot today. You know, here's a really great resource that you can read, as a way to kind of, you know, help with that conversation. But again, I think got to go back to when we are using these words, what do we mean? You know, when we say that someone's a diverse candidate, okay, what does that mean? And we oftentimes rely on these very umbrella terms because we're uncomfortable. And so I think we all have to become a little bit more comfortable being uncomfortable, which is kind of like my tagline. I should trademark it. But we all have to become comfortable being uncomfortable, and ask ourselves when we're hiring for fit, you know, what persona are we hiring for? And how does that bias factor into our decisions? And so that would be my take, right? Is let's continue to create spaces that are psychologically safe, where I can say, you know, as a Black woman in Maine, you know, don't want to always talk about race and racism because I live it, and it can become very tiring. And I understand the emotional labor there. And at the same time, you know, how can we also all become more comfortable being uncomfortable, and being specific in the words that we use, and the processes that we're trying to become, to create more equitably.
Any other good strategies that have worked for you, Gimbala or Amy?
I got nothing. She hit everything, so good.
Thanks, Gimbala. And I think, you know, I think part of it is that, you know, the reality is the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion is not new. Of course, it has evolved over time, and there are roles now, and you know, but you know, let's just call it that. You know, we are humans, and we all have brains, and if we're human and we have brains, we have bias, and bias factors into all the decisions that we make, all of the products that we create, all of the ways that we conduct our business. And if we can be more thoughtful about, you know, are we creating these processes, ways that we conduct business from a place of equity and access and inclusion, I think that then makes it more sustainable. And it has to be connected to our leaders, it has to engage our employees. And we didn't touch on this. It also has to be, measurable, because we want to make sure that it's not just window dressing and smoke and mirrors, right? We don't want to just check boxes here. I think I'll speak for myself. I'm in it for the evolution, for the journey, for the progress. And I would speak for my colleagues who are on the panel too. It goes beyond, it's good for business, and it's also just good, right? I lead from it's just good for us to create spaces where everyone feels like they can come to work authentically, contribute fully, and be a part of the work that we're doing on a day-to-day basis. It helps us live out our purpose.
I think sometimes too, what I wanted to add, which connects to the question about the rural areas before, is that we're not, we're a culture within a culture within a culture within a culture. Like, we're part of a wider community. So I would encourage employers who maybe lived in some sort of isolation to really reach out to your library, your schools, get to know, who are the families living in my town. And maybe you'll be surprised that I think a lot of people are surprised all the time when I say that 75% of the total demographic growth in Portland comes from an immigrant communities since 2011. It's like, so if they're not part of your PTA, you're not seeing them in the library, you're not interacting with them when you go to the bank, something is not connecting. So get to know your community, and there's many resources out there that from the city of Portland, we can help you, connect you to those as well.
Yeah, and so I'm glad you brought that up, Julia, because I think most often, when you say diversity, there's this immediate thought of, person of color, you're talking about gender or anything like that. But I think it goes far beyond that, right? And I will say this, when we started, so one of the things that my mission in life is to eliminate as many barriers as possible for anyone that I interact with in my professional work, in what I do, right? So from a talent acquisition standpoint, when we started to create, initiatives around attracting and eliminating or mitigating barriers for folks to be able to have access to work at WEX, and we started to provide transportation and housing for our interns and whatnot. Most of the people that use those benefits are folks within the state of Maine, students within the state of Maine that live outside of Portland, right? In the rural areas of Maine that want the opportunity to be able to come in and work for an organization in Southern Maine, right? So they use the benefit of us paying housing for them to come and intern during the summer. Those things are part of that larger conversation around what do we mean by diverse? Because diverse is not just a person of color or gender. It's about getting the diversity of folks that are in the areas of the state that don't have the accessibility that we all crave every day, right? And they'll have the opportunity to be able to come down to Southern Maine and work. Or going next door and to your point, understanding your neighbors, understanding their lived and shared experiences, because you want to build a more equitable community. So those things those are the things that I think about, right? Beyond just black and white and male and female type understanding of diversity.
So we are getting to the end of our dialogue and conversation. I know we still have a few questions lingering, but we'll make sure to condense them all and maybe try to engage the panelists and the rest of us to try to provide some answers to the rest of the questions. I didn't know if there were some final thoughts before Quincy closed it out for all of us, but from my perspective, I would like to thank all of you for sharing your lived experiences and your perspectives in this very important subject that sometimes is tricky to handle it, but it's so important, and I'm so glad we're having this discussion with you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would just say, stay vulnerable, stay inquisitive, and listen. You'll learn a lot from your staff, from other folks in your organization, from other HR professionals. Keep the conversations going.
Yeah, and I guess I would wrap up by just saying, again, be curious. Let's just all become a little bit more comfortable being uncomfortable. And remember that, you know, if you have a brain, you have bias. And so if we can just be thoughtful about how to be intentionally inclusive, create equity within our organizations, our processes, how we conduct our business, will all be the better for it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Quincy?
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to thank the panel as well. This was fantastic. I'm so appreciative of your time and your energy and your insight into this issue. I know it was extremely beneficial to all of those who participated today. So thank you so much again. I think this was a great, as Julia mentioned at the beginning, this is just the beginning. This is going to be a long journey for all of us. And I think it's really smart for organizations to be thinking about what they can do in this space, but not jumping to action right away. We need to ensure that we have the right culture in place and that we have the understanding of what it is we are trying to change and why we are trying to change it. So with that, I'd like to mention another training we're offering next week, which actually we're probably doing these trainings in reverse order. However, next Tuesday, the Racial Equity Institute is offering their groundwater approach to our membership. And for those who are not familiar with REI, they're a pretty fantastic organization who's been talking about this topic for 10 plus years. We have made a wonderful connection with them, and they are offering this training next Tuesday. It really sets the ground level of what racism is and how it is in our groundwater. And I think it's vitally important for us to understand that before we start jumping to action. So for all of you who participated today, I would strongly encourage you to tune into the Racial Equity Institute training next Tuesday. I think Joe just put it into the chat. We have a sponsor for this, so we are able to offer it for a discounted price. It's usually $100. It is well worth the $100. We are able to offer it for $25 a person because of a sponsorship with Unum. And please share it with your teams because there's an unlimited number who we can have participate in this. So again, I think it'll be just another great part of all of our journey as we learn about racism in our society and how we can start to address it and start to impact change. So with that, again, thank you to our panelists and to our trustee moderator. This was incredible. A recording will be available for this, so we'll make sure we send it out to all of you and it'll be on our website. And I hope to see many of you next week at the Racial Equity Institute training. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.